right after a bunch of fiddling around and trying out different things, we have our next idea for how this is going to work, which is definitely the craziest one. So I need foot space, so we just slid the transmission over here all the way. So the rear end going off that one, front end going off this one to a jack shaft, not necessarily this jack shaft, where it'll go over and up to there. So this only brings us down to one jack shaft, one regular chain connection back there. In theory, it'll fit with the tub on, but the biggest thing, the scariest part of it, is I need to cut out this section of the frame to sink the transmission down. Now, I'll cut it out for now. We'll put in the transmission mounting plate, that'll beefen it up, and then we will go back in and put a section of frame around it tying into this body mount. You know, we're not going to just leave that frame out. It'll just have to mean that frame's edited, which isn't a big deal because I already still think I need to do a C-notch back here. So this frame is not going to stay how it is anyway. So kind of a wild idea, but should, in theory, work. All right, I think I made a decision here on the rear suspension situation. So, one thing I'm really concerned about is that a single shock is not going to be enough. And the chain, running the chain for this is going to be kind of tough. And the third most important reason is that shock, where it mounts there, makes this thing sit on a gnarly rake. And to change that would be a lot of work on this thing. So rather than trying to modify that swing arm, we're going to build our own custom swing arm, incorporating a second shock from the other parts quad, which I just dragged inside. So we have dual rear shocks, custom swing arm, maybe a little shorter. I don't know. We'll mess with that. I really want to try and get the transmission farther back so it's not in the footwell. But that's the direction we're going to go. So we're going to build a custom swing arm, dual shocks. So let's go start ripping this guy apart. This thing is, I think, another Polaris Sportsman 325, I hope. This got, the deal when I went to go buy these two quads was a mess. I was originally only supposed to buy this one, but in the listing it had wheels, tires, and a rear axle, which as you see is not true. So after driving 2 hours and finding that out, I was not very happy. And thankfully, the guy threw in the other four-wheeler, which had all the parts that I was missing. So now I have double the front end parts, which is good because I suspect the electrical system for engaging the front hubs is going to be a little questionable. So it's good to have spares. We had the transmission off this one if we needed it. I don't think I will. I'm going to stay with my Peerless. And now we have a double swing arm. So I'm going to cut this swing arm up. We'll leave that one alone for now, and we'll compare the two shocks, make sure they're the same. And then hopefully, this thing does have a motor in it. I don't know any of the history on it at all, but I'm really hoping I can get some money out of parting this thing out, maybe? I don't know. We'll see if it pulls over. And I'll let you guys know if I can make my money back. I paid $300 for the two of these, which, I mean, wasn't a great deal, but I think it'll be worth it in the end to have four-wheel drive and suspension. And it's got tires and all that stuff. So let me get to pulling this thing apart. All right, so we harvested this shock out of this thing, and other than it going to be looking like Christmas colors, should work. But man, I understand why people hate these quads. The construction on this thing is wild. There's a lot of engineering going on here, which I can appreciate. But so you have a chain output there for the rear. You have a brake mechanism up here instead of the rear axle, which is going to become a problem for me later. And then you have another chain out here, which goes up to a jack shaft there, which has its own separate adjustment there, and then shoots out to another sprocket all the way to the front, which is still actually hooked up. Which is great because I can use all those sprockets for my project, and it'll also help me better understand the gearing on these. But it's just a real pain in the neck. For instance, I want this rear swing arm, but that's going to require taking apart this whole brake assembly and that whole cover and what's under there, I guess a clutch probably. And it just seems like a real pain in the neck. So pronto for figuring it out there, Polaris, but man, you did not make it easy to work on these things. So I guess I'm doing a good service by taking it apart and building something else much more simple? Question mark. Well, I've been struggling trying to get the swing arm out for way too long now. I got one bolt out, but the other bolt, another stripped. I'm tired of asking. All right, well, we got the swing arm out now. So for the plan, we're going to cut it off there, cut off these two ears. Need to make sure this stays parallel in the same distance. Make sure they stay parallel, but we can change the overall distance. Then instead of making this angled like this, I just want a nice straight one and room for 2 shock mounts that can go get the shock mounts as low as possible so we can get the rear end to sit equal with the front end. So that's the plan. Now we just need to do a ton of cutting and thinking and fabbing. So I will keep you guys updated. All right, been plugging away on the swing arm here. Got our bars mocked up. Got our bushing sleeves welded in. We've got the carrier clamp kind of made back into shape. That's going to need some modification, but we got it all cut up. And most importantly, we have our top of our swing arm design. So I'm going to go ahead and knock that out on the plasma, get it all tacked up, and then figure out where our springs are going to go. All right, we got a whole pile of parts here cut out and ground down, so let's go ahead and build ourselves a swing arm. All right, well, it's taken quite a bit of time, but whipped up this sweet swing arm that I'm super happy with. Got it all plated in here, got these tubes all nice and straight, my bushings welded in nice and straight. Then I knocked on these 2 shock brackets that were going to work out great until I realized this shock bracket is going to make me put the shock right where the chain needs to go. So that's not going to work. So that side shock still will work, but we're back to the drawing board over here, which really stinks. I was really happy with how this is turning out. And yeah. So I either need to put the shocks inside this plate, which also really stinks because I tacked this plate on from the inside, so I can't even just rip this off to see what's going on. I gotta cut the other side. I gotta cut my whole swing arm apart. So that stinks, but oh well. Still be able to use the swing arm. I just gotta figure out something different for the shocks. So let me do some thinking, and I'll show you guys what I come up with. So you can see the red spring is offset. These aren't centered. That may cause me some issues. It's definitely going to spread stress around this thing kind of weirdly, being more spring over here, not over here, but I expect to only mostly sit over here. So maybe it'll work out. And I just can't think of a good way to put a spring over here with that chain right there. So I'm sure I could have figured out something, but we're going to try this first. So it looks really cool. It is kind of funky that both springs are different. You can see kind of what I knocked up for some hangers, which are adjustable with these 3 holes, and then you can adjust the springs as well. And then you can see my complete custom swing arm. Well, not complete because I reused this end for the axle carrier holder. And basically 2 square tubes, plated top and bottom. Right now it's only the top. I got to re-add the bottom since I changed it. And then just the original bushings off the OG swing arm, welded with some brackets on that cross member. So I think it'll work. But the next issue is I think we need to, that thing's way stiffer now with 2 springs. We're going to set the body back on it. Now that it's dual sprung, we're going to see if I need to clearance the frame, put a C-notch in it or not. With the single spring, we definitely would have had to. With dual springs, we might not have to, but I probably will just to be safe. So let's go ahead and try that. All right, let's try the sit test once more. it's way stiffer. Might be too stiff now. I can adjust those springs, but I'm sure with me riding it, it'll get worn out and then the springs might work great. I don't know. But for right now, I like that. We got 2 inches of clearance on the axle, so that's sweet. So I think we can finally call the rear suspension done. I expected the rear to be really easy and the front to be a tough spot, and that was completely opposite. The front would have been much tougher if I didn't just graft the front of the ATV frame in, but that's easy, and I mean, it doesn't look too bad. So I think we finally have a 4-wheel drive, at least front and rear differential, having fully suspension, rolling. I'm gonna call this thing half scale Jeep Willys, maybe 3rd scale, I don't know, but that's a huge milestone. All right, next thing on the list is steering. I want to get this established, and then I'll establish where the motor sits. Now that we have suspension and everything, make sure it's all going to work well. So there's a shaft that goes down in here that used to be the handlebar shaft with 2 little tabs that hold the end of the tie rods. So we're going to use that original portion, cut it off. Then I have some U-joints, and we're going to use the original shaft plus the shaft from the parts quad. So we'll come up, over, and somehow to the steering wheel. I think it'll work, but I'm not 100% sure how I'm going to do it yet. Here's some of the parts I've already started mocking up. That's the original steering shaft cut down with one of my U-joints welded on. I ordered 2 of these, so hopefully that's enough. And then we've got some pillow blocks to support it. So I'm just going to show you guys what I come up with, because I'm sure I'll go through multiple renditions of this. So yeah. All right, been plugging away at the steering here. Haven't been doing a ton of filming because I was doing a ton of different trial ideas, but I think we got it hammered out. So you'll see I plasma cut out this 3/8 plate, which holds our pillow block. So you see the original steering piece has those 2 tabs where the tie rods go into. Goes up into a U-joint, through the pillow block, into another U-joint, and then we will use this shaft, which will shoot it over there with 1 final U-joint. I had to order a 3rd. That's going to shoot the steering wheel up at the angle that I want. So the next step is I need a way to hold the pillow block up here under the cowl. So we're going to kind of transition away from the steering for a minute and work on our engine cage, which is going to encompass these 2 pieces of square tubing. Basically, it's just going to be flat bar under the cowl, and then we'll have some sort of a hoop, and we're going to make that all bolt in or pin in somehow so I can pull it off to get to the engine, because I don't want to box the engine in and then never be able to get it out. So that is the plan. All right, well, big progress. We made the hoop, which is very simple. I'd love to have a tube bender for this project, but we're using square tube for now. Got our shaft running to here. We'll have another pillow block in there, or at least a clamp to hold that. Then we have our final pillow block out here with our steering wheel. Now, I'm not sure this is going to work long term, but it should work for at least the first test drive, I hope. That plate definitely needs bracing. And I think even with that braced, and this braced better, we'll gusset that all up, I still don't think it'll work. This steering wheel's a very small diameter, so you have very little leverage. And there's 3 U-joints in there. So we got some things working against this. We'll see. Definitely not going to be able to steer it from a stop. But when we drive it, maybe you can. I don't know. We're going to leave it be for now. It'll work for the first test drive. That's for sure. Next thing, I got our 40 series rear sprocket and our 40 series front sprocket, which is a custom quick change hub from EC Carburetors, which is an online website, and they sell parts for racing tractors. So with this hub, I can put any range of sprockets on there. This one's a 12 tooth, I think, or a 13. That's what we're going to start with. But before we can throw a chain on this thing, we got to mount the transmission, which is going to include hacking the frame up to fit it in that spot or close to that spot. So we're going to do a bunch of measuring, and then I'm going to take apart the whole rear end, pull the motor, and get it up on the table so I can clamp everything down and cut that frame and keep everything as square as possible, hopefully. Alrighty. You can't really tell, but I got the Jeep up on my table now. Got the rear axle out of it, got the motor out of it, and we're getting ready to cut a big old chunk out of my frame, which I've been really kind of worried about all week. And you'll notice we're actually going to cut out behind the swing arm because I think I can jam the transmission back here instead of up in the floorboard. Don't know for sure yet. We'll find out. But I've been thinking about it too long, so I'm just going to go ahead and start cutting now. Alrighty, got it welded in. Obviously, we're going to do some clearancing here so I can get a bolt in for the swing arm, or at least a nut on. Actually, I might be able to do, I don't know, we'll see. So, behind the cross member, the swing arm will be swinging right there, hopefully. And yeah, I'm not 100% sure this will work. I hope it does now that I cut my frame up, but I think I can get the transmission. I might lower this down below the top of the frame here if I can't get my belt below here. Or I could also trim this up and fill it back in with a flat plate, kind of like I had done with this old piece of angle iron, which was the original cross member before I went to the swing arm setup. Anyway, I think this will work. It's going to take some work, but it should work. So now that I've got it all tacked up, I need to throw the transmission back in it and I guess get it back off the table, put the swing arm in it, and check it all out and see if it's going to work how I think it will. All right, I think it's going to work. Yeah, flip back over, got the axle in it. I had also dropped this engine plate, which dropped the whole suspension down about a ½ an inch. So hopefully that levels out the whole thing a little bit better. It's still a little bit raked, but I'm hoping with me in it, or at least the body and stuff on it, it'll sit more flat. But back to the main point here. The transmission's sitting about where it should be. And we look like we can align well with that. And then the other thing I was worried about was the pulley down here, which even with it tucked all the way up on the transmission, it looks like we'll clear that cross member. So we hopefully don't even have to mess with that. So that's awesome. The floor should line up with that cross member, so this transmission will not be in the floor. We'll obviously have to change the shifter around, which isn't a big deal. I think this is completely reversible, so that'll get it more centered again. And yeah, I'm really happy with how that worked out. I didn't think that was going to happen. So we'll trim this off. Obviously, the front drive chain, when we get to that's going to be a little funky. That's going to run all the way up the inside of the body, but shouldn't be an issue because we have like 3 inches of clearance past the frame, and we should have that no problem. Worst case, we'll bump out a chain case on the side, which would look a little funky, but would be worth it. So I'm going to keep on moving along and give you guys an update when I get somewhere. Alrighty. Trimmed away the excess of that plate down here and then capped it with this little trapezoid or whatever shape that is. And the transmission has just enough clearance to sit in there and be able to slide nicely, giving us some belt adjustment, which leads me into the next thing I've been working on, which I don't think you guys saw these components, but these components were all built when I was originally going to set this thing up as a go-kart, and thankfully I can still use most of them. So here we just have a big triangle with a slot in it and a idler pulley off the deck of a tractor. Ordered those on Amazon. They're just universal ones. So that's pretty simple belt tensioner. And then over here, we have a very similar idea for the clutch, which that needs to be ground off. I welded that earlier and forgot to grind it off. But we have a fully adjustable throw clutch and another idler belt. And then a system that usually works pretty good. And then, of course, a spring for return. So I did buy a belt this morning, but it's too short, so I got to go run out and buy another one. But this system's all seeming like it's going to work, which is great. Next, we have I ordered a set of 40 series chain, so I can go ahead and install that later. So that should all work. So hopefully our rear drivetrain is set up. I also bolted the motor down. And now, the next thing I think I'm going to work on is our exhaust, actually, because that's one of the... I can't really run this motor without an exhaust to test it, so that's the next big thing. Which, the exhaust would be very simple, except for my exhaust and my jack shaft for the future four-wheel drive is going to be right in the same area. So kind of got to do some planning on where all the four-wheel drive jack shaft and sprockets and everything are going to be before I build this exhaust. Which, while we're talking about that, I want to talk about how I plan to do the four-wheel drive. So as you guys saw, it'll just be a chain up to there, jack shaft over, and then chain up to there. And I've switched everything over to a 40 series sprocket and chain set. And the original front end on this requires a 520 chain, which is this sprocket here, which I harvested off of my parts and pieces from the second quad that I got. So the plan is I need to get a sprocket with this spline, and I can't find anything in a 40 series like that. So I think I'm going to send this sprocket and a new similar size 40 series sprocket to the local machine shop who opened up the bore of this 40 series for me, and see if they can't get me two sprockets, get the center of this sprocket to put in the center of another sprocket, or maybe machine this down and make it a hub. I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but I'm going to figure out something. So we're going to use old parts and some new parts and cobble something together that's going to work. And the reason I'm using the 40 series chain is it gives me a lot more options on our transmission. The chains and sprockets are a lot cheaper, and for the amount of power we're using, I think a 40 series will be completely fine. Alrighty, got it flipped up on its side now. We got the proper length belt. We have our clutch here, which this is the clutch pedal. Functions like so. We have an idler here, which has plenty of tensioning ability. We also have some adjustment on the transmission here. We've got it right dead center, which you'll may need to use for tensioning the chain, but we also have there's a tensioner back here. I can't think of the word I'm trying to think of. But yeah, I think this setup is going to work. The clutch pedal's still a little funky because it pulls back like this. We might be able to change that. We do have adjustment on here too, so we can get more or less engagement on the clutch. So really happy with that. Also went ahead and cut out some brackets to beefing up this area, that area, and then tied this in here, which that'll all get fully welded, obviously. And also did the same thing on the front. This will get capped, but I think this should work. So now I'm going to go ahead and grab the chain, and we'll throw that on for the first time. All right, been making steady progress here, and got two big things done. Got our fuel tank mounted back here, which was just a tab to the shock mount, and then another vertical piece of tubing with a plate on top of that. That's mounted firmly, and it's above the carburetor, I think, so it should flow fuel without a pump, but I will probably add a pump in the future. And then we have our gas pedal mounted here, which I'm not 100% sure I'm going to love this mounting yet, but we'll see. And I've actually got a piece of 1-inch square tubing going down into a piece of 1.5 inches, so that's actually removable, so we can still get the body off of it. Threw the exhaust on, which is not going to be final at all. I got to wait to build the exhaust for when I do the four-wheel drive setup. But I'm really itching to hear this thing run and possibly drive it. So we're going to go ahead and jump start it, turn the fuel on, and see what happens. All right, here goes nothing. We got the rear end jacked up so it can't take off, hopefully. And with these brakes motors, you should be able to just hit the starter. It should fire up. You don't need to hook up anything for ignition. choke here. We're going to hit it with some starting fluid. It hasn't ran in quite some time. Over the whole tires with. Well, I think our belt is just too short. I can see the clutch is coming completely away from the belt, and it's just grabbing too much. So I guess we need to go with maybe an inch longer belt, which is going to be super loose, but I don't know. Probably would be fine if the belt was worn in and slipping, but it's not. It's brand new. All right, well, now you've seen this thing run for the first time, which is a huge milestone. And in theory, the drive system does work, although we do need a longer belt. I'm really happy. But don't let it fool you. We still have hours of work ahead of us. I need to completely finish out the body, welding and blending all the seams. The hood needs the same treatment. We need a dashboard. Some more sheet metal work on the inside of the tub for a firewall. This thing needs a ton of work still. We need to hook up the four-wheel drive, exhaust, brakes, and probably 10 other things. So we're nowhere near finished, but we did hit a huge milestone, and that's important. So I think we're going to call it for this video. So come back next time. We're going to actually widen the tub to make it a two-seater, and finish off a bunch of other things. And hopefully, by the end of that video, we will actually get to drive it, maybe. No promises, but maybe. So, thank you guys for watching, and keep an eye out for, I think this was part 4, so part 5 in the future. So, thank you guys. Goodbye.